May our Father, Messiah, and Holy Spirit be with us. Continue reading. Number 12. Let's read the Bible. Let's see. Yep, right here. We're on 13. This happened sometime afterward. Absalom, son of David, had a beautiful sister named Tamar, and Amnon, son of David, became infatuated with her. Amnon was so distraught because of his half-sister, Tamar, that he became sick, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. Amnon had a friend named Yonadab, the son of David's brother, Shemu'ėl. Yonadab was a very clever man. He asked him, "Why are you so dejected, O prince? Morning after morning, tell me." Amnon replied, "I am in love with Tamar, the sister of my brother Absalom." Yonadab said to him, "Lie down in your bed and pretend you are sick. When your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Let my sister Tamar come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in front of me so that I may look on, and let her serve it to me.'" Amnon lay down and pretended to be sick. The king came to see him, and Amnon said to the king, "Let my sister Tamar come and prepare a couple of cakes in front of me, and let her bring them to me." David sent a message to Tamar in the palace, "Please go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him." Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was in bed. She took dough and kneaded it into cakes in front of him and cooked the cakes. She took the pan and set out the cakes, but Amnon refused to eat and ordered everyone to withdraw. After everyone had withdrawn, Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food inside and feed me." Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them to her brother inside. But when she served them to him, he caught hold of her and said to her, "Come lie with me, sister." But she said to him, "Don't, brother, don't force me. Such things are not done in Israel. Don't do such a vile thing. Where will I carry my shame? And you will be like any of the scoundrels in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not refuse me to you." But he would not listen to her. He overpowered her and lay with her by force. Then Amnon felt a very great loathing for her. Indeed, his loathing for her was greater than the passion he had felt for her. And Amnon said to her, "Get out." She pleaded with him, "Please don't commit this wrong. To send me away would be even worse than the first wrong you committed against me." But he would not listen to her. He summoned his young attendant and said, "Get that woman out of my presence," and barred the door behind her. She was wearing an ornamented tunic for maiden princesses were customarily dressed in such garments. His attendant took her outside and barred the door after her. Tamar put dust on her head and rent the ornamented tunic she was wearing. She put her hands on her head and walked away, screaming loudly as she went. Wow, her brother Absalom said to her, "Was it your brother Amnon who did this to you? For the present, sister, keep quiet about it. He is your brother. Don't brood over the matter." And Tamar remained in her brother Absalom's house, forlorn. When King David heard about all this, he was greatly upset. It said, but he did not rebuke his son Amnon, for he favored him, since he was his firstborn. While Absalom did not utter a word to Amnon, good or bad, but Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. 2 years later, when Absalom was having his flock sheared at Baal Hazor near Ephraim, Absalom invited all the king's sons. And Absalom came to the king and said, "Your servant is having his flocks sheared. Would your majesty and your retinue accompany your servant?" But the king answered Absalom, "No, my son, we must not all come, or will be a burden to you." He urged him, but he would not go, and he said goodbye to him. Thereupon Absalom said, "In that case, let my brother Amnon come with us." To which the king replied, "He shall not go with you." But Absalom urged him, and he sent with him Amnon and all the other princes. And Absalom made a feast fit for a king. Now Absalom gave his attendants these orders. Watch, and when Amnon is married with mine, and I tell you to strike down Amnon, kill him. Don't be afraid, for it is I who give you the order. Act with determination like brave men. Absalom's attendants did to Amnon as Absalom had ordered, whereupon all the other princes mounted their mules and fled. They were still on the road when a rumor reached David that Absalom had killed all the princes and that not one of them had survived. At this, David rent his garment and lay down on the ground, and all his courtiers stood by with their clothes rent. But Jonadab, the son of David's brother, Shemu'ėl, said, My master must not think that all the young princes have been killed. Only Amnon is dead. For this has been decided by Absalom ever since his sister Tamar was violated. So my master the king must not think for a moment that all the princes are dead. Amnon alone is dead. Meanwhile, Absalom had fled. The watchman on duty looked up and saw a large crowd coming from the road to his rear, from the side of the hill. Jonadab said to the king, See, the princes have come. It is just as your servant said. As he finished speaking, the princes came in and broke into weeping. And David and all his courtiers wept bitterly, too. Absalom had fled. And he came to Talmai, son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. And King David mourned over his son a long time. Absalom, who had fled to Geshur, remained there 3 years later. And King David was pining away for Absalom, for the king had gotten over Amnon's death. 14. Joab, son of Zeruiah, could see that the king's mind was on Absalom. So Joab sent to Tekoa and brought a clever woman from there. He said to her, Pretend you are in mourning, put on mourning clothes, and don't anoint yourself with oil, and act like a woman who has grieved a long time over a departed one. Go to the king and say to him, thus and thus. And Joab told her what to say. The woman of Tekoa came to the king, flung herself face down to the ground, and prostrated herself. She cried out, Help, O king. The king asked her, What troubles you? And she answered, At last, I am a widow, my husband is dead. Your maidservant had 2 sons. The 2 of them came to blows out in the field where there was no one to stop them, and one of them struck the other and killed him. Then the whole clan confronted your maidservant and said, Hand over the one who killed his brother, that we may put him to death for the slaying of his brother, even though we wipe out the heir. Thus they will quench the last emperor remaining to me, and leave my husband without name or remnant upon the earth. The king said to the woman, Go home, I will issue an order in your behalf. And the woman of Tekoa said to the king, My master, king, may the guilt be on me and on my ancestral house. Your majesty and his throne are guiltless. The king said, If anyone says anything more to you, have him brought to me, and he will never trouble you again. She replied, Let your majesty be mindful of our Father in heaven, Elohim, and restrain the blood avenger bent on destruction, so that my son may not be killed. And he said, As our Father in heaven lives, not a hair of your son shall fall to the ground. Then the woman said, Please let your maidservant say another word to my master the king. Speak on, said the king. And the woman said, Why then have you planned the like against Elohim's people? And making the pronouncement, your majesty condemns himself, in that your majesty does not bring back his own banished one. We must all die. We are like water that is poured out on the ground and cannot be gathered up. Elohim will not take away the life of one who makes plans, so that no one may be kept, banished. Elohim will not punish you for bringing back the banished Absalom. And the reason I have come to say these things to the king, my master, is that the people have frightened me. Your maidservant thought I would speak to your majesty. Perhaps your majesty would act on the handmaid's plea, for your majesty would surely agree to deliver his handmaid from the hands of anyone who would seek to cut off both me and my son from the heritage, from the people of Elohim. Your maidservant thought, Let the word of my master the king provide comfort, for my master the king is like an angel of Elohim, understand everything, good and bad. May our Father in heaven, your Elohim, be with you. Wow, that's beautiful. Amen. In reply, the king said to the woman, Do not withhold from me anything I ask you. The woman answered, Let my master the king speak. The king asked, Is Joab in league with you in all of this? The woman replied, As you live, my master the king, there is no turning to the right or to the left of what my master the king says. Yes, your servant Joab was the one who instructed me, and it was he who told your maidservant everything she was to say. It was to conceal the real purpose of the matter that your servant Joab did this thing. My master is a wise My master is as wise as an angel of Elohim, and he knows all that goes on in the land. Then the king said to Joab, I would do this thing. Go and bring back my boy Absalom. Joab flung himself face down on the ground and prostrated himself. Joab blessed the king and said, Today your servant knows that he has found favor with you, my master king, for your majesty has granted his servant's request. And Joab went at once to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. But the king said, Let him go directly to his house and not present himself to me. So Absalom went directly to his house and did not present himself to the king. No one in all Israel was so admired for his beauty as Absalom. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, he was without blemish. When he cut his hair, he had to have it cut every year, for it grew too heavy for him. The hair of his head weighed 200 shekels by the royal weight. Absalom had 3 sons and daughters, whose name was Tamar. She was a beautiful woman. Absalom lived in Jerusalem 2 years without appearing before the king. Then Absalom sent for Joab in order to send him to the king. But Joab would not come to him. He sent for him a second time, but he would not come. So Absalom said to his servants, Look, Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. And Absalom's servants set the field on fire. Joab came at once to Absalom's house and said to him, Why did your servants set fire to my field? Absalom replied to Joab, I sent for you to come here. I wanted to send you to the king to say on my behalf, Why did I leave Geshur? I would be better off if I were still there. Now let me appear before the king. And if I am guilty of anything, let him put me to death. Joab went to the king and reported to him, whereupon he summoned Absalom. He came to the king and flung himself face down to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. Sometime afterward, Absalom provided himself with the chariot, horses, and 50 outrunners. Absalom used to rise early and stand by the road to the city gates. And whenever a man had a case that was to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call out to him, What town are you from? And when he answered, Your servant is from such and such a tribe, your servant is from one of the tribes in Israel, Absalom would say to him, It is clear that your claim is right and just, but there is no one assigned to you by the king to hear it. And Absalom went on, If only I were appointed judge in the land, and everyone with a legal dispute came before me, I would see that he got his rights. And if a man approached to bow to him, Absalom would extend his hand and take hold of him and kiss him. Absalom did this to every Israelite who came to the king for judgment. Thus Absalom won away the hearts of the men of Israel. After a period of 40 years had gone by, it says, some Syriac read 4. So after a period of 40 or 4 years had gone by, Absalom said to the king, Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow that I made to our Father in heaven. For your servant made a vow when I lived in Geshur of Aram. If our Father in heaven ever brings me back to Jerusalem, I will worship our Father in heaven. The king said to him, Go in peace. And so he set out for Hebron. But Absalom sent agents to all the tribes of Israel to say, When you hear the blast of the horn, announce that Absalom has become king in Hebron. 200 men of Jerusalem accompanied Absalom. They were invited and went in good faith, suspecting nothing. Absalom also sent and summoned Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his town Giloah. When the sacrifices were to be offered, the conspiracy gained strength, and the people supported Absalom in increasing numbers. See, it said the conspiracy gained strength, and the people supported Absalom in increasing numbers. Someone came and told David, The loyalty of the men of Israel has veered toward Absalom. Whereupon David said to all the courtiers who were with him in Jerusalem, Let us flee at once, or none of us will escape from Absalom. David said to all the courtiers who were with him in Jerusalem, Let us flee at once, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must get away quickly, or he will soon overtake us and bring down disaster upon us and put the city to the sword. The king's courtiers said to the king, Whatever our master the king decides, your servants are ready. So the king left, followed by his entire household, except for 10 concubines, whom the king left to mind the palace. The king left, followed by all the people, and they stopped at the last house. All his followers marched past him, including all the Cherethites and all the Pelethites, and all the Gittitites. 600 men who had accompanied him from Gath also marched by the king. And the king said to Attai the Gittite, Why should you two go with us? Go back and stay with the new king, for you are a foreigner, and you are also an exile from your country. You came only yesterday. Should I make you wander about with us today? But I myself must go whenever I can. Go back and take your kinsman with you in true faithfulness. Ittai replied to the king, As our Father in heaven lives, and as my master the king lives, wherever my master the king may be, there your servant will be. whether for death or for life. And David said to Ittai, then march by. And Ittai the Gittite, and all his men, and all the children who were with him, marched by. The whole countryside wept aloud as the troops marched by. The king crossed the Kidron valley, and all the troops crossed by the road to the wilderness. Then Zadok appeared with all the Levites carrying the ark of the covenant of Elohim, and they set down the ark of Elohim until all the people had finished marching out of the city. Abiathar also came up. But the king said to Zadok, take the ark of Elohim back to the city. If I find favor with our Father in heaven, he will bring me back and let me see it in its abode. And if he should say, I do not want you, I am ready. Let him do with me as he pleases. And the king said to the priest, Zadok, do you understand? You return to the safety of the city with your two sons, your own son, Ahimaaz, and Abiathar's son, Jonathan. Look, I shall linger in the steppes of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. Zadok and Abiathar brought the ark of Elohim back to Jerusalem, and they stayed there. David meanwhile went up to the slope of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered, and he walked barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and wept as they went up. David was told that Ahithophel was among the conspirators with Absalom, and he prayed, please, O our Father in heaven, frustrate Ahithophel's counsel. When David reached the top, where people would prostrate themselves to Elohim, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, with his robe torn and with earth on his head. David said to him, if you march on with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you go back to the city and say to Absalom, I will be your servant, O king. I was your father's servant formerly, and now I will be yours. Then you can nullify Ahithophel's counsel for me. You will have the priest Zadok and Abiathar there, and you can report everything that you hear in the king's palace to the priests. Zadok and Abiathar, also their two sons, are there with them. Zadok's sons, Ahimaaz, and Abiathar's son, Jonathan, and through them you can report to me everything you hear. And so Hushai, the friend of David, reached the city as Absalom was entering Jerusalem. David had passed a little beyond the summit when Zabai, the servant of Mephibosheth, came toward him with a pair of saddle donkeys carrying 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisin, 100 cakes of figs, and a jar of wine. The king asked Ziba, what are you doing with these? Ziba answered, the donkeys are for your majesty's family to ride on. The bread and figs are for the attendants to eat, and the wine is to be drunk by any who are exhausted in the wilderness. And where's your master's son? The king asked. He is staying in Jerusalem. Ziba replied to the king, for he thinks that the house of Israel will now give him back the throne of his grandfather. The king said to Ziba, then all that belongs to Mephibosheth is now yours. And Ziba replied, I bow low, your majesty is most gracious to me. As King David was approaching Baharim, a member of Saul's clan, a man named Shemu'ėl, son of Gera, came out from there, hurling insults as he came. He threw stones at David and all David's courtiers, while all the troops and all the warriors were at his right and his left. And these are the insults that he hurled. Get out, you criminal, you villain. Our Father in heaven is paying you back for all your crimes against the family of Saul, whose throne you seized. Our Father in heaven is handing over the throne to your son Absalom. You are in trouble because you are a criminal. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why let that dead dog abuse my master the king? Let me go over and cut off his head. But the king said, what has this to do with you? What have I and you? Your sons of Zeruiah, he is abusing me, only because our Father in heaven told him to abuse David, and who is to say, why did you do that? David said further to Abishai and all the courtiers, if my son, my own issue, seeks to kill me, how much more the Benjamite? Let him go on hurling abuse, for our Father in heaven has told him to. Perhaps our Father in heaven will look upon my punishment and recompense me for the abuse Shemu'ėl has uttered today. David his men continued on their way, while Shemu'ėl walked alongside on the slope of the hill, assaulting him as he walked and throwing stones at him and flinging dirt. The king and all who accompanied him arrived, exhausted, and he rested there. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, arrived in Jerusalem together with Ahithophel, when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came before Absalom. Hushai said to Absalom, long live the king, long live the king. But Absalom said to Hushai, is this your loyalty to your friend? Why didn't you go with your friend? Not at all, Hushai replied. I am for the one whom our Father in heaven and his people and all the men of Israel have chosen, and I will stay with them. Furthermore, whom should I serve, if not David's son? As I was in your father's service, so I will be in yours. Absalom then said to Ahithophel, What do you advise us to do? And Ahithophel said to Absalom, have intercourse with your father's concubines, whom you left to mind the palace. And when all Israel hears that you have dared the wrath of your father, all who support you will be encouraged. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and Absalom lay with his father's concubines with the full knowledge before the eyes of all Israel. In those days, the advice which Ahithophel gave was accepted, like an oracle sought from Elohim. That is how all the advice of Ahithophel was esteemed, both by David and by Absalom. Wow. And Ahithophel said to Absalom, let me pick 12,000 men and set out tonight in pursuit of David. I will come upon him when he is weary and disheartened, and I will throw him into a panic. And when all the troops with him flee, I will kill the king alone, and I will bring back all the people to you. And I will bring back all the people to you when all have come back, except the man you are after. To you as a bride comes back to her husband, you seek the life of but one man, and all the people will be at peace. The advice pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel, but Absalom said, summon Hushai, the Archite, as well, so we can hear what he too has to say. Hushai came to Absalom, and Absalom said to him, this is what Ahithophel has advised. Shall we follow his advice? If not, what do you say? Hushai said to Absalom, this time the advice that Ahithophel has given is not good. You know, Hushai continued, that your father and his men are courageous fighters, and they are as desperate as a bear in the wild robbed of her whelps. Your father is an experienced soldier, and he will not spend the night with the troops. Even now, he must be hiding in one of the pits or in some other place. And if any of them fall at the first attack, whoever hears of it will say, a disaster has struck the troops that follow Absalom. And even if he is a brave man with the heart of a lion, he will be shaken. For all Israel knows that your father and the soldiers with him are courageous fighters. So I advise that all Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sands of the sea, be called up to join you, and that you yourself march into battle. When we come upon him, in whatever place he may be, will descend on him as thick as dew falling on the ground, and no one will survive, neither he nor any of the men with him. And if he withdraws into a city, all Israel will bring ropes to that city and drag its stones as far as the riverbed, until not even a pebble of it is left. Absalom and all Israel agreed that the advice of Hushai the Archite was better than that of Ahithophel. Ahithophel. Our Father in heaven has decreed that Ahithophel's sound advice was nullified in order that our Father in heaven might bring ruin upon Absalom. Then Hushai told the priests Zadok and Abiathar that this is what Ahithophel advised Absalom and the elders of Israel. This is what I advised. Now send at once and tell David, do not spend the night at the fords of the wilderness, but cross over at once. Otherwise, the king and all the troops with him will be annihilated. Jonathan and Ahimaaz were staying at En-Rogel, and a slave girl would go and bring them word, and they in turn would go and inform King David. For they themselves dared not be seen entering the city. But a boy saw them and informed Absalom. They left at once and came to the house of a man in Baharim who had a well in his courtyard. They got down into it, and the wife took a cloth, spread it over the mouth of the well, and scattered grots on top of it, so that nothing would be noticed. When Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house and asked where Ahimaaz and Jonathan were, the woman told them that they had crossed a bit beyond the water. They searched but found nothing, and they returned to Jerusalem. After they were gone, Ahimaaz and Jonathan came up from the well and went and informed King David. They said to David, go and cross the water quickly, for Ahithophel, his name is hard to pronounce for me, has advised us, and thus concerning you, David and all the troops with him promptly crossed the Jordan. And by daybreak, not one was left who had not crossed the Jordan. When Ahithophel saw that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey and went home to his native town. He sent his affairs in order, and then he hanged himself. He was buried in his ancestral tomb. When Ahithophel saw that his advice had not been followed, he saddled his donkey and went home to his native town. He set his affairs in order, and then he hanged himself. He was buried in his ancestral tomb. David had reached Mahanaim when Absalom and all the men of Israel with him crossed the Jordan. Absalom had appointed Amasa army commander in place of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Ithra, the Israelite, who had married Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, and sister of Joab's mother Zeruiah. the Israelites and Absalom encamped in the district of Gilead. When David reached Mahanaim, Shobai son of Nahash from Rabbath Ammon, Machir son of Ammiel from Lo Debar, and Barzillai the Gileadite from Rogalim presented couches, basins, and earthenware, also wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans, lentils, parched grain, honey. Say that again. Parched grain, honey, curds, a flock, and cheese from the herd for David and the troops with him to eat, for they knew that the troops must have grown hungry, faint, and thirsty in the wilderness. David mustered the troops who were with him and set over them captains of thousands and captains of hundreds. David set out the troops, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. And David said to the troops, I myself will march out with you. But the troops replied, No, for if some of us flee, the rest will not be concerned about us. Even if half of us should die, the others will not be concerned about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore it is better for you to support us from the town. And the king said to them, I will do whatever you think best. So the king stood beside the gate as all the troops marched out by their hundreds and thousands. The king gave orders to Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, deal gently with my boy Absalom for my sake. Other troops heard the king give the order about Absalom to all the officers. The troops marched out into the open to confront the Israelites, and the battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim. The Israelite troops were routed by David's followers, and a great slaughter took place there that day, 20,000 men. The battle spread out over the whole region. In the forest of Arab men more troops that day than a sword. Absalom encountered some of David's followers. Absalom was riding on a mule, and as the mule passed under the tangled branches of a great tabernacle, his hair got caught in the tabernacle. He was held between heaven and earth as the mule under him kept going. One of the men saw it and told Joab, I have just seen Absalom hanging from a tabernacle. Joab said to the man who told him, You saw it, why didn't you kill him? Then and there, I would have owed you 10 shekels of silver and a belt. But the man answered Joab, Even if I had 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, I would not raise a hand against the king's son. For the king charged you and Abishai and Ittai in our hearing, watch over my boy Absalom for my sake. If I betray myself and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have stood aloof. Joab replied, Then I would not wait for you. He took 3 darts in his hand and drove them into Absalom's chest. Absalom was still alive in the thick growth of the tabernacle when 10 of Joab's young arm bearers closed in and struck at Absalom until he died. When 10 of Joab's young arms bearers closed in and struck at Absalom until he died. Then Joab sounded the horn, and the troops gave up their pursuit of the Israelites, for Joab held the troops in check. They took Absalom and flung him into a large pit in the forest, and they piled up a very great heap of stones over it. Then all the Israelites fled to their homes. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken the pillar which is in the valley of the king, and set it up for himself, for he said, I have no son to keep my name alive. He had named the pillar after himself, and it has been called Absalom's monument to this day. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, Let me run and report to the king that our Father in heaven has vindicated him against his enemies. But Joab said to him, You shall not be the one to bring tidings today. You may bring tidings some other day, but you will not bring any today, for the king's son is dead. And Joab said to Cushai, Go tell the king what you have seen. The Cushite bowed to Joab and ran off. But Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, again said to Joab, No matter what, let me run too behind the Cushite. Joab asked, Why should you run, my boy, when you have no news worth telling? I am going to run away, then run. He said. So Ahimaaz ran by way of the plain, and he passed the Cushite. David was sitting between the 2 gates. The watchman on the roof of the gate walked over to the city wall. He looked up and saw a man running alone. The watchman called down and told the king, and the king said, If he is alone, he has news to report. As he was coming nearer, the watchman saw another man running, and he called out to the gatekeeper, There is another man running alone. And the king said, That one too brings news. The watchman said, I can see that the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, to which the king replied, He is a good man, he comes with good news. Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, All is well. He bowed low with his face to the ground and said, Praise be our Father in heaven, your Elohim, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against my master the king. The king asked, Is my boy Absalom safe? And Ahimaaz answered, I saw a large crowd when your majesty's servant Joab was sending your servant off, but I don't know what it was about. The king said, Step aside and stand over there. He stepped aside and waited. Just then the Cushite came up, and the Cushite said, Let my master the king be informed that our Father in heaven has vindicated you today against all who rebelled against you. The king asked the Cushite, Is my boy Absalom safe? And the Cushite replied, May the enemies of my master the king and all who rose against you do to you harm, rose against you to do you harm? Fear like that, young man. The king was shaken. He went up to the upper chamber of the gateway and wept, moaning these words as he went, My son Absalom, oh my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you, oh Absalom, my son, my son. Joab was told that the king was weeping and mourning over Absalom, and the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the troops. For that day the troops heard that the king was grieving over his son. The troops stole into town that day, like troops ashamed after running away in battle. The king covered his face, and the king kept crying aloud, Oh, my son Absalom, oh Absalom, my son, my son. Joab came to the king in his quarters and said, Today you have humiliated all your followers, who this day saved your life and the lives of your sons. Joab came to the king in his quarters and said, Today you have humiliated all your followers, who this day saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines, by showing love for those who hate you and hate for those who love you. For you have made clear today that the officers and men mean nothing to you. I am sure that if Absalom were alive today and the rest of us dead, you would have preferred it. Now arise, come out and placate your followers. For I swear by our Father in heaven that if you do not come out, not a single man will remain with you overnight, and that will be a great disaster for you, than any disaster that has befallen you from your youth until now. So the king arose and sat down in the gateway, and when all the troops were told that the king was sitting in the gateway, all the troops presented themselves to the king. Now the Israelites had fled to their homes. All the people throughout the tribes of Israel were arguing. Some said, The king saved us from the hand of our enemies, and he delivered us from the hands of the Philistines. And just now he had to flee the country because of Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, has died in battle. Why then do you sit idle instead of escorting the king back? The talk of all Israel reached the king in his quarters. So King David sent this message to the priests Zadok and Abiathar. Speak to the elders of Yehuda and say, Why should you be the last to bring the king back to his palace? You are my kinsmen, my own flesh and blood. Why should you be the last to escort the king back? And to Amasa say this, You are my own flesh and blood. May Elohim do thus and more to me, if you do not become my army commander permanently in place of Joab. So Amasa swayed the hearts of all the Yehudites as one man, and they sent a message to the king, Come back with all your followers. The king started back and arrived at the Jordan. And the Yehudites went to Gilgal to meet the king and to conduct the king across the Jordan. Shemu'ėl son of Gera, the Benjamite from Baharim, hurried down with the Yehudites to meet King David, accompanied by 1,000 Benjamites, and Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, together with his 15 sons and 20 slaves, rushed down to the Jordan ahead of the king while the crossing was being made, to escort the king's family over and to do whatever he hoped. Shemu'ėl son of Gera flung himself before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan. He said to the king, Let not my master hold me guilty, and do not remember the wrong your servant committed on the day my master the king left Jerusalem. Let your majesty give it no thought, for your servant knows that he has sinned. So here I have come down today. The first of all the house of Joseph to meet my master the king. Thereupon Abishai son of Zeruiah spoke up, Shemaiah be put to death for that, assaulting our Father in heaven's anointed. But David said, What has this to do with you, your sons of Zeruiah, that you should cross me today? Should a single Israelite be put to death today? Don't I know that today I am again king over Israel? Then the king said to Shemaiah, You shall not die. And the king gave him his oath. Mephibosheth, the grandson of Saul, also came down to meet the king. He had not pared his toenails or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day that the king left until the day he returned safe. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, Why didn't you come with me? Mephibosheth, he replied, My master the king, my own servant, deceived me. Your servant planned to saddle his donkey and ride on it and go with your majesty, for your servant is lame. Ziba has slaughtered your servant to my master the king, but my master the king is like an angel of our Father in heaven. Do as you see fit, for other members of my family, or my father's family, deserved only death from my master the king. Yet you set your servant among those who ate at your table. What right have I to appeal further to your majesty? The king said to him, You need not speak further. I decree that you and Ziba shall divide the property. And Mephibosheth said to the king, Let him take it all, as long as my master the king has come home safe. Barzillai the Gileadite had come down from Rogalim and passed on to the Jordan with the king to see him off at the Jordan. Barzillai was very old, 80 years of age, and he had provided the king with food during his stay at Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. The king said to Barzillai, Cross over with me, and I will provide for you in Jerusalem at my side. But Barzillai said to the king, how many years are left to me that I should go up with your majesty to Jerusalem? I am now 80 years old. Can I tell the difference between good and bad? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? Can I still listen to the singing of men and women? Why then should your servant continue to be a burden to my master the king? Your servant could barely cross the Jordan with your majesty. Why should your majesty reward me so generously? Let your servant go back and let me die in my own town, near the graves of my fathers. Near the graves of my father and mother. But here's your servant, Chimham. Let him cross with my master the king, and do for him as you see fit. And the king said, Chimham shall cross with me, and I will do for him as you see fit. And anything you want me to do, I will do for you. All the troops crossed the Jordan, and when the king was ready to cross, the king kissed Barzillai and bade him farewell. And Barzillai returned to his home. The king passed on the Gilgal with Chimham accompanying him, and all the Judite soldiers and part of the Israelite army escorted the king across. Then all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, why did our kinsmen, the men of Yehudah, steal you away and escort the king and his family across the Jordan, along with all Dawood's men? All the men of Yehudah replied to the men of Israel, because the king is our relative. Why should this upset you? Why have we consumed anything that belongs to the king? Has he given us any gifts? But the men of Israel answered the men of Yehudah, we have 10 shares in the king, and in Dawood too we have more than you. Why then have you slighted us? Were we not the first to propose that our king be brought back? However, the men of Yehudah prevailed over the men of Israel. A scoundrel named Shemu'ėl, son of Bichariah, Benjamin, happened to be there. He sounded the horn and proclaimed, we have no portion in Dawood, no share in Yishai's son. Every man to his tent, O Israel. All the men of Israel left Dawood and followed Shemu'ėl, son of Bichariah. But the men of Yehudah accompanied their king from the Jordan to Jerusalem. Dawood went to his palace in Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 concubines he had left to mind the palace and put them in guarded place. He provided for them, but he did not cohabit with them. They remained in seclusion until the day they died, living widowhood. The king said to Amasa, call up the men of Yehudah to my standard and report here 3 days from now. Amasa went to call up Yehudah, but he took longer than the time set for him. And Dawood said to Abishai, now Sheba, son of Bichariah, will cause us more trouble than Absalom, so that your master's servants and pursue him. Also take your master's servants and pursue him before he finds fortified towns and eludes us. Joab's men, the Cherethites and Pelethites, and all the warriors marched up behind him. They left Jerusalem in pursuit of Sheba, son of Bichariah. They were near the great stone in Gibeon when Amasa appeared before them. Joab was wearing his military dress, with his sword girded over it and fastened around his waist in its sheath. And as he stepped forward, it fell out. Joab said to Amasa, how are you, brother? And with his right hand, Joab took hold of Amasa's beard as if to kiss him. Amasa was not on his guard against the sword in Joab's left hand, and Joab drove it into his belly so that his entrails poured out on the ground, and he died. He did not need to strike him a second time. Joab and his brother Abishai then set off in pursuit of Sheba, son of Bichariah, while one of Joab's henchmen stood by the corpse and called out, whoever favors Joab and whoever is on Dawood's side, follow Joab. Amasa lay in the middle of the road, drenched in his blood, and the man saw that everyone stopped. And when he saw that all the people were stopping, he dragged Amasa from the road into the field and covered him with a garment. Once he was removed from the road, everybody continued to follow Joab in pursuit of Sheba, son of Bichariah. Sheba had passed through all the tribes of Israel up to Abel of Beth Maacah, and all the Beerothites assembled and followed him aside. Joab's men came and besieged him in Abel of Beth Maacah. They threw up a siege mound against the city, and it stood against the rampart. All the troops with Joab were engaged in battering the wall, when a clever woman shouted from the city, Listen, tell Joab to come over here so I can talk to him. He approached her, and the woman asked, Are you Joab? Yes, he answered, and she said to him, Listen to what your handmaid has to say. I'm listening, he replied. And she continued, In olden times, people used to say, Let them inquire of Baal. And that was the end of the matter. I am one of those who seek the welfare of the faithful in Israel. But you seek to bring death upon a mother city in Israel. Why should you destroy our father in heaven's possession? Joab replied, Far be it from me to destroy or to ruin. Not at all, but a certain man from the hill country of Ephraim named Sheba, son of Bichariah, has rebelled against King Dawood. Just hand him alone over to us, and I will withdraw from the city. The woman assured Joab, His head shall be thrown over the wall to you. The woman came to all the people with her clever plan, and they cut off the head of Sheba, son of Bichariah. and Bechariah and threw it down to Joab. He then sounded the horn. All the men dispersed to their homes, and Joab returned to the king in Jerusalem. Joab was commander over the whole army of Israel. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was commander of the Cherethites and the Pelethites. Adoram was in charge of forced labor. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was recorder. Sheba was scribe. Zadok and Abiathar were priests. Ariah the Yavathite also served out with as priest. May our Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be with us. I pray that this reading was edifying for you. And I'm just going to go and enjoy the rest of my day. Father will bless me to just be able to get a job. So that's amazing. And, just going to try to work as best as I can. May our Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be with us. Amen.